Good day and welcome back to another Dbz Dokkan video. In this video we're going to be taking a look at the performance of the TEQ Trunks unit in the Ultimate Red Zone against Broly. So essentially this is going to be a pretty straightforward kind of review. I think Trunks is pretty good in any red zone that doesn't start out dramatically difficult. So as long as the red zone doesn't hit out like 500k right in the beginning, which can happen, I think Trunks is pretty good. Because his weakest state is his first turn. After Super, his defense is okay in his first turn. We're talking like 270k. But then at that point, afterwards, essentially, he gets quite strong quite quickly. So realistically speaking, as long as he can kind of get through the first turn and maybe the first turn of his Super Saiyan form, generally after that, barring surprise supers or type disadvantage supers, he tends to be a very reliable defensive unit. Now to talk about Trunks, let's talk about his abilities. Obviously he's a future Saga lead, which is super duper important. He raises his attack and defense by 25% per turn once he transforms into Super Saiyan, up to a max of 100%. He also gains or greatly raises attack and defense every single turn, which is 50% on his super attack. And then he also has the ability to fire up to 4 super attacks in a turn, as well as also being able to have increasing crit chance of 30% and then higher. And especially from the 4th turn, he essentially has quite a few benefits. So yeah, definitely something to really keep your eye on. I think Trunks overall is an incredibly good unit that has a lot of really solid abilities. He's a very solid unit, and yeah, I think he's great. So obviously, base form, weakest state, then transforming into Super Saiyan, he'll stack fairly quickly, getting up to speed quite fast. We're talking 400k defense, 500k defense. We're talking quite reliable abilities basically. So yeah, it's a fairly straightforward kind of situation, I think, for the most part. Honestly speaking, he's a really good unit, and because he has Int, Trunks and Vegeta, who are obviously a fantastic first start unit, he's not really in dire need of anything basically. So he's in a really good situation, personally speaking, as an incredibly solid unit that just has a really great setup. Not to mention he's also, for the most part, quite reliable when it comes to his own consistency. He's definitely more a damage dealing unit than anything else, but his defense is solid. I think a big thing with him is the built-in crits, which kind of allow you to just go this full additional kind of build, which in most cases is realistically pretty solid, at least from my perspective. So yeah, honestly speaking, he's really solid, really decent. Great linking partner in the form of the Int, Trunks and Vegeta. I think Int Future Gohan will also be a solid partner for him as well. So yeah, I think in general he's pretty good. Obviously the big kind of debate point is going to be his, how can I say, when to use his boost mechanism, the sort of hope mechanism. Obviously turns him into a nuking unit, by creating tech orbs and allowing him to gain attack and defense per orb. It gives him guaranteed crits, which is pretty big. And his defense, if you've stacked up high enough, isn't terrible, but it's very orb dependent. If he maybe made a whole field of orbs, I would say, realistically it's pretty solid, but he changes orbs, but it doesn't really guarantee him the most. Sometimes you get super lucky, and then Trunks can really bust out a super impressive attack stat, and then other times it's just, not necessarily the greatest. So definitely a bit of a mixed bag in regards to that, but I think overall Trunks is really solid offensively in all of his forms. So overall I think that's quite good. Obviously the Broly event's pretty nice for him because it has a decent length to it, which allows him to build up and it's also got a fairly decent starting point. I think the worst events for him are things like the Metal Cooler event, whereby he's facing a fairly strong int unit right out the bag. I think that doesn't help him a lot. I think that can give him some issues, and I would say that's probably it right now. The Shinron event's also relatively difficult for him, but once you get past that int phase, he's generally fine. And then for the final, for the Shinron red zone, he's also generally fine because he has, although time disadvantage in the first and final phase. The first phase doesn't hit too bad outside of the super, and in the final phase he'll have enough defense for normals. You just can't really stick him in the way of the super attack that the boss does. So yeah, generally speaking, he's good in most of the red zones. Just yes, there is kind of this, how can I say, this anticipation that he could potentially take quite a bit of damage from an int unit, which I think is fine. Honestly speaking, taking damage from an int unit is not the end of the world. So for me, it's not that big a deal to judge him on. I think overall he's really quite solid. So I would definitely say that for me he's really good. But yeah, outside of that, generally speaking, I think he's he'll do great in most red zones. Honestly speaking, if you have it in Trunks and Vegeta, then generally speaking you don't even have a big issue with running him. So yeah, I honestly just think he's great, and I think he's a really good unit that just gives us a very decent kind of level of performance across the board, and without too many issues at all. Realistically speaking, I think he's just, great. I really like him. So yeah, honestly speaking, I don't think there's too much to nitpick when it comes to Trunks. I think if I'm looking at him and looking at what he brings to the table, I think he brings enough of everything that you don't really have to be too concerned. The strength phase, the AoE can hit him for quite a bit, depending on how much you've stacked up. If he can get his super attacks off, he won't die, but he will take a fair chunk of damage. We're talking around 300k, which is a fair chunk. It's not an insignificant amount of damage to be taking. So yeah, generally speaking, there is that aspect to it, but it's not the end of the world. But it is something to be aware of. The AGL phase, he's just more than fine. That ability to, just generally be really quite solid is obviously something that you have to kind of evaluate pretty much on first basis. I think the boost phase can do some really big damage to Broly, but you have to always debate whether you're willing to sacrifice the definite solid defense he has. I mean, there you saw 1,000,000 defense comparative to the much less defense he's probably going to have in his damage mode. However, you will see some very good offense, and obviously the guaranteed crits do help. Much like the Mastery Transformation, it still feels a lot like a finishing move more than anything else, but at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world. I think for the most part, it will be fairly solid, and I think you shouldn't have the biggest issues. But like I said, I think it's going to be orb dependent. If you don't have the orbs, then you will feel it. It is going to feel like he can be a bit inconsistent, and you can't really change that too much. However, if you do get the orbs, then you get to obviously have him do very big damage like you just saw there. And that wasn't even like a huge amount of orbs. I would say that was a fairly decent number of orbs, probably on the lower end of a very good amount of orbs. So yeah, overall I think he's great. I think he's super solid, and I think he functions fantastically. At least for me, I think he's really good, and I enjoy using him a lot. So yeah, we'll finish things off with the Vegeta active skill here, which is great. But yeah, I think overall Trunks is great. He'll be good in a lot of red zones, and he's just the type of unit that's fairly consistent and also gives us a little bit of everything we need when we're running him, especially as a second slot unit. With that being said, yeah, I'm pretty happy with how he did. I think he did great. Big contribution. and the perfect foil if you have Int, Vegeta and Trunks. That's it, bye!